And it looks like there are still people coming in.
I don't know. I don't know if Nate ended up in the audience.
I'm looking.
He's quite key to this conversation tonight.
Well, we have a few minutes. The hearing starts at 6:05, so, and we are recording, so why don't you go ahead and do your call to order and so on, and I'll see if I can buzz Nate.
Yeah, thanks. I don't have his contact information. We have a quorum. We have started recording, and I'm going to go around to see if everyone can be heard, starting with Pat DeAngelis.
Present.
Jennifer Taub.
Yes, here.
Councillor Haneke.
Present.
And Pam Rooney is present. It is December 3, and it is 6:02 p.m. Pursuant to Chapter
Bob
20.
Laura is in participants.
Thank you. Pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021 and extended by Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, this meeting will be conducted via remote means. Members of the public who wish to access the meeting may be able to do so via Zoom or by telephone. No in-person attendance of members of the public is possible, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. I am going to reopen or continue the public hearing on University Drive overlay in accordance with the provisions of Mass General Law, Chapter 40A. This public hearing of the Community Resources Committee of the Amherst Town Council has been duly advertised, and notice thereof has been posted and is being held for the purpose of providing the opportunity for interested residents to be heard regarding the following proposed amendments to the zoning bylaw. As referred to this committee by the Town Council, a proposed zoning bylaw, Article 17, University Drive Overlay District, to consider amending the zoning bylaw by adopting the University Drive Overlay District as Article 17 and amending the official zoning map by adding the University Drive Overlay District. The overlay district would include properties on the east and west sides of University Drive between Northampton Road, aka Route 9, and Amity Street, and would establish its own requirements for only mixed-use buildings, including dimensional standards and conditions, and design guidelines. There's Nate. Good. My plan for the sequence of events is I need to ask if there are any member disclosures, any reason you should recuse yourself. Hearing none. We will go to the applicant presentation, which in this case is town staff, and then from Doug Marshall, an update from the planning board, and we'll call on him so the update, the presentation from Nate, I'm thinking is 5 to 8 minutes long. I don't know how long you've projected to present, but it seems like it could be fairly concise. So I appreciate that. And Nate, if you have any material that you would like to put up or share, I think Athena can help you do that.
Sure, yeah, thanks everyone. Nate Malloy, a planner with the town. I can be shorter than 5 minutes or longer. So, you know, the overlay is hasn't changed since the presentation to town council. So when that was discussed a while ago, there was, you know, a boundary map, the language of the bylaw, and then a memorandum. And the planning board has held a few hearings on it to review the overlay. And there's been some ideas discussed, but in essence, the overlay hasn't changed since it was looked at by council. So it's still the same boundaries and relatively the same standards and conditions and everything there. And so as an overlay, it doesn't change the base zoning.
Nate, excuse me, I need to pause just for a second to acknowledge Councillor Ette. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Sorry for
thank
the
you. Thank you. Sorry, Nate.
Oh, no, sure, that's fine. I know I was almost late. It's hard in Zoom to sneak in. So the overlay is doesn't change the base zoning or any zoning that's in place. It is only applicable to mixed-use buildings. So it doesn't force anything. It's really an opportunity if someone were to use the overlay to develop a mixed-use building, then they would have to comply with the overlay. And so, it's not forcing out businesses or changing the zoning or what's happening there now. We see it as an opportunity for multi-unit development with, a mixed-use component. And so, as Pam noted, it is from Amity Street to Route 9, and the properties on either side of that section of University Drive. It doesn't extend south of Northampton Road or beyond Amity Street to the north. It's still what was there. So most of the properties would be redeveloped if they were using the overlay. There's maybe a few limited opportunities for new development, but a lot of it would be redevelopment. And staff and the planning board thought this was a great place to have denser development. There's not neighborhoods too adjacent to it. There are some close by, and there's existing retail and commercial. The hope is that with the mixed use requirement, some of those could remain or be repurposed. And the overlay is, all the definitions and standards within the overlay apply just to the overlay into mixed use buildings. And so it doesn't apply anywhere else in town, or, those standards or how we define mixed uses is only applicable in the overlay. So currently right now, we'd say mixed use is 30% of the floor area. In the overlay, we're trying a different strategy. We're saying it's 75% of the facade length along the street to a depth of 24 feet or so. And so the idea is really to have uses along the streetscape to activate University Drive. We have wide setbacks, and that's to keep the buildings are a bit taller. There's a wide right of way. It's 95 to 100 feet, and we're proposing 24-foot front setbacks. And really, so there's anywhere from 140 to 150 feet. If buildings were from setback to setback. So it's a pretty wide setback. It's to allow the west side, the access drive, to be used as a pedestrian way. Some of that is private property, and there's easements there, and so those would have to be worked through. The current development at 422 Amity Street, the one that's under review by permitting right now, they own a number of properties. They'll extinguish the easements. It only serves them, and then create a 10 to 12 foot wide wide sidewalk there, mirroring Swift Way on the other side. There's a sidewalk and then Swift Way, which is a multi-use path bikeway. So the idea is to maintain the street trees, keep wide sidewalks with a buffer from the road, and then allow, multi-unit buildings up to 6 stories with some design standards. And so it's not overly prescriptive, but there's enough conditions there in terms of varying the facade, stepping back the 6th floor, breaking up massing between the first and upper floors, and then also along the facade length. And so I'm not sure if there's anything else I need to discuss. I will say that towns reached out. When we noticed the planning board hearing, we also sent notice to all the property owners. A few have reached out. We did meet with the owners of the Big Y properties, and they've submitted something in writing saying that they see this as a nice opportunity for flexibility in the future. Their plan is to own, actually grocery store anchored properties with mostly retail. They don't do residential. And so they're in a number of MBTA communities across the state. They are mostly in the Northeast. They understand zoning. They actually see this as a nice opportunity, which may or may not be used in the near future, but something that they would support. Not many other property owners expressed an opinion one way or the other. There's 1 or 2 that had questions. Cooley Dickinson Hospital has spoken at the planning board, and they see it as an opportunity, and they're just, they said they were concerned about groundwater and some impacts to stormwater, but other than that, they didn't really say one way or the other. But I did, want to let you know that the property owners were noticed, and they received the memo, I think the map and maybe the language. I forgot what we included, but we did send them information if they needed, wanted to know. And I can turn it over to Doug to relay what the planning board's been discussing.
I'm going to ask if we could please get the map up. There may be people in the audience who have not seen the map, so we have a better sense of what we're talking about.
Yep, let me make this a little. if that's visible for everyone. So here's Amity Street to the north. Here's University Drive. Here's Northampton Road. And so here's the town line. So it actually follows the town line south, includes a number of properties along here. Here's Ginger Garden on the corner, and then properties on the east side. So here's Five College Realtor Building. Cooley Dickinson is in this area, all the way north back to Amity Street. And so it's, this was the boundary that was presented to town council, and it has remained unchanged right now through the planning board hearings.
Thank you. Doug, do you want to give us an update?
Thank you. Nate covered most of what I thought I would say. We have had at least 2 hearings since the town council referred it back to us for our hearing. Several of us did listen to the town council conversation, so much of the conversation since then has been about the concerns that were raised by council. I would say that at this point, I haven't heard a clear consensus about how we felt about some of those concerns, especially about the fear that Big Y and CVS might be pushed out. As Nate mentioned, Cooley Dickinson did speak to us a couple of times, mostly about groundwater, but I will add that at least my memory is, Nate, that at one of those moments where the fellow from Cooley Dickinson spoke, he said they would be very unlikely to do any more housing, that in fact they had kind of long-range plans perhaps to expand their operation there on that corner. So it didn't seem like they would be taking advantage of this, but at the same time, any fears that that operation might be pushed out did not sound like anything that he was worried about or envisioned. We have continued our hearing and it remains open. We'll have a conversation tomorrow night. The strategy was to wait and hear some of the conversation tonight before we hopefully close tomorrow, but it may not be tomorrow. I will say there was at least one member who was concerned, who felt that there was a need for some urgency so that the Barry Roberts project at the corner of Amity Street and University Drive could take advantage of the 6th floor. And he was prepared to, throw in the towel on the south end of the area and just try to get the north end passed and implemented as soon as possible so that Barry's project could incorporate that. I don't know how optimistic he was or is, but that was just one thing that I'll mention in the context of the process we are in. Otherwise, I'm really here just to answer any questions and to hear about any new concerns that have been come to mind since the town council hearing, and have a good sense of where you guys stand before we continue our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Christine.
Hello, thank you. I just to explain to whoever's attending the meeting, I am working part-time for the planning department and I'm participating in this public hearing. The 6th floor, the urgency about the 6th floor may not be as crucial anymore because Barry Roberts and his team are seeking to withdraw the variance that they had requested of the Zoning Board of Appeals. And I believe that they are no longer planning to have a 6th floor on that project for various reasons. So I don't know if that will influence your thought process and your discussion, but I thought I should mention that they're asking to withdraw their variance request. The other thing I wanted to mention is that the email that we received from the owners of the property that Big Y and CVS sit on, I think their name is Crosspoint, but Nate could correct me if I'm wrong. they have long-term leases, and the lease for the Big Y and the CVS buildings have at least 20 years left on their leases. So they're unlikely to go away anytime soon. And as Nate said, the owners of the property do focus.
I think she's frozen. We're gonna go to Nate. And she'll come back, I'm sure, when she's realizes.
This hasn't she's hasn't frozen in the planning board meetings in the past, so this is unusual. Yeah, I was going to say that just a few things. The owners, Crosspoint, they value the stores they have, and they're very high performing. And so I actually think that they would be the type of owners who would, if they were going to change the property, they'd keep Big Y and CVS and try to put another building possibly. But they value the idea of getting more customers, and they said that this is an A+ location for them. What I was going to mention, the planning board has discussed is we have a 65-foot or 6th floor height limit. Since the overlay was proposed, staff's talked to a few developers, and 65 feet really isn't tall enough to accommodate 6 floors. And so there's been discussion about having it be like 70 or 72. Honestly, it's like 68.5 feet is kind of the way 6 floors would work, given how they construct buildings now. The amount of space they need for a first floor, and then how they frame up the upper floors. And the other one is on the corner near where Big Y is located. I was going to share my screen again. There's been discussion and of you can change some standards and conditions. And so the property owners of Big Y, they were comfortable if, say, for instance, their properties or some part of the overlay, I'll just mention this area in blue, if instead of having we could have a different standard for mixed use, and there's talks of having it be 100% ground floor has to be non-residential uses, and they were supportive of that. So instead of having 30% or what we have in the overlay, 75% of a facade length back to a certain depth, they were comfortable having it be 100% ground floor non-residential use. And and that would really make someone who wants to redevelop those properties be thoughtful about what they're doing, because then the whole ground floor has to be a non-residential use. And so they'd have to come in then with a plan, which may be different than if you don't have that. And so that's something that has been discussed at the planning board, and something that some members felt was kind of a nice approach, a balance of allowing multi-unit development, but also still retaining a large amount of non-residential space, and then also encouraging say the Big Y, if it was redeveloped, to have that space within a building that could accommodate bigger uses. So
Thank you. We have 14 attendees in the audience, and what I'm proposing to do is to take questions and comments from the public up to 3 minutes. I will ask for a full name and address, and I'm also going to ask that Nate and Christine are available to actually answer the questions after we get through the questions. I think it would be really appropriate for those questions to be answered as best possible. If they're not possible to answer, then we will ask for that information to maybe come back at another meeting.
Point of order.
Counselor Haneke.
Thank you. I believe our rules of procedure have a specific order for public hearings that start with after the presenter's presentation, go to counselor questions, and then questions from the public, then comments from the public, then back to counselor questions.
Well, I made a decision to waive that order because
you can't waive that order without the committee agreeing. It's a rule of procedure. Let's
bring it to the committee. I have lots of questions, and a fairly in-depth look at what's being proposed. So I did not want the audience have to wait through all of our questions before they had a chance to speak and ask their questions. So I decided unilaterally to try to rearrange that, and I'd be happy to take a vote. If someone wants to make a motion to rearrange the order for tonight, I'll make a motion. I make a motion that we rearrange the order and allow attendees to speak and ask questions first, and then counselor questions to be asked second. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. We'll take a vote. Pat DeAngelis,
It's okay with me.
Counselor Haneke,
Nope.
Pam Rooney is an aye, Counselor Ette,
Aye.
and Jennifer Taub.
Aye.
Okay, so we are going to allow the audience to ask questions first, and perhaps many of the answers that we hear will answer our own questions. Doug, I think I would be happy to have you stay in the audience. I wasn't intending to have you part of that conversation, but we can, if you want to say something that's a point trying to be made, I'd be happy to acknowledge you with a raised hand.
That's fine, Pam.
Thank you. Sheena, can we put Doug in the audience, please? Chris,
I'm sorry, I lost my connection, so I have not been part of the meeting for the last few minutes. But I just wanted to make sure that you heard my two comments about the fact that Barry Roberts is withdrawing his variance request to have a sixth floor. And the other comment was that the long-term leases for Big Y and CVS include at least 20 more years of their being on site, and that the property owner focuses on properties that have a grocery store as an anchor. Just wanted to make sure that you heard those comments. Thank you.
thank you. We did catch those before you froze.
Okay.
I'm going to open this up for public comment and questions. And anyone who would like to ask or speak, please raise your hand. And we will try to bring you in and let you speak. We're going to be up to 3 minutes. And let's see, what was I going to say? Up to 3 minutes, please give your full name and address or district. So anyone in the audience who would like to speak, I'll just start at this point calling people in, and then we will we'll stop when comments have stopped. I'm going to start with Gabriella. Can you please give us your full name and address?
I'm Gabriella Horvey. I live at 24 Greenleaf Drive, Unit 419. And unfortunately, I missed some of your presentation because of these instructions about having to sign in with a password and going to Zoom anyhow. So I have a couple of questions. So one is that it's not going to be a 6-story building. Is that the case? Or what? That the student housing would not be 6 stories? Or is that just with Barry Roberts, a corner?
That was just that for that specific project on the corner at 422 Amity Street. The overlay is still proposed to be 6 floors.
He has what?
The reduction from 6 to 5 floors is for a project under permitting review now. It's not for
Okay.
the overlay.
Okay, and that CVS and Big Y would continue to be there where they are for about 20 years?
Well, we can't guarantee that, but they're in long-term leases for over 20 years, and the owners have said that they have no plans to change that.
Okay, so I just wanted to clarify that, but the one comment I really want to make is I think it's a great idea that the town of Amherst is doing what it can to increase housing. And I think that's a great use of that space, or those spaces on Amity to do so. People need housing, and this town frequently doesn't find any place that's acceptable for housing, for like apartment housing and stuff. And I think it's great that Amherst is trying to do this. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriella. Can someone bring in Martha Hanner?
I'm Martha Hanner. I live in District 5 on Alyssum Drive, speaking as an individual. And I certainly support the use of that section of University Drive for student housing. However, I would like to ask, is there really a good, strong reason why the overlay couldn't just stop and not include the Big Y CVS area? I mean, yes, they have a 20-year lease, but still, and maybe because of that, why not just not include that one final block there in the overlay? Let them just stay independent as the commercial district. We really want to guarantee that we still have a major grocery store and a major pharmacy for our residents. So thank you.
Thank you, Martha. We've alluded to this letter and correspondence with the Big Y operators, and it makes sense that maybe we just read the letter that we were sent, and it does explain some of that information. This is a letter to Nate Malloy, our planner. Thanks again for reaching out and taking the time to speak with us about the proposed mixed-use overlay district along University Ave. We are completely in support of the proposed overlay district as drafted and would very much like to have the Amherst Shopping Center included. We also do understand and appreciate the concern amongst some members of the community that this could lead to the shopping center losing tenants such as Big Y and CVS in favor of converting to residential. The shopping center is currently 100% occupied, and the high-performing tenants, including Big Y and CVS, have long-term leases in place with control of their premises for the next 20 years. Additionally, the vast majority of the properties that CrossPoint owns and manages are grocery-anchored shopping centers similar to the Amherst Shopping Center. And CrossPoint does not intend on diverging from this business model. However, as we are long-term owners of our real estate, we do believe that it is important, given the constantly changing face of retail, that we have flexibility in the future to add a mixed-use component if for some unforeseen reason we sustain any large static vacancy. Again, just to reiterate, any addition of mixed use at the shopping center within the next 20 years would require the collaboration of both Big Y and CVS, as well as the town of Amherst. If there are any further questions that we can help to answer as you move through the process of implementing the overlay district, please feel free to reach out directly. It is signed by Jonathan Huber, Managing Principal for CrossPoint Associates. So as far as those members that are here today, this is the information we have been given, and it feels worth sharing with you all. Can someone bring in Robert Pomeroy, please?
Hello?
Yes.
Okay, hi, I'm Bob Pomeroy. I'm at 35 Amity Place. And apologies, I also came late to the Zoom meeting, and as a new resident in Amherst, sort of getting up to speed with this project. So apologies if you've already covered some of these things. I guess our questions in terms of the housing, is the housing that's envisioned in the overlay district primarily or exclusively student housing? Or is there also a plan to include affordable housing for families, for instance? I think I'd seen sort of different things in previous materials about the project. Other question, are there actual plans? It sounds like there are actual plans for particular developments in the overlay district. If you could maybe, point us where to find information on that, as opposed to the actual, just the outlines of the rezoning. In terms of concerns, also support more housing options. Do wonder a bit about student housing and whether the need for student housing is as great as would justify this sort of development in addition to the other off-campus developments. I think North Amherst is one that's being planned. So interested in the reasoning behind that. And then just a general concern about the height of 6 stories. One of the things we love about the area that we're in now is just the overall feel for it. I understand that developing the area is a worthwhile project, but would I don't know, would not like to see it overly urbanized, I guess. So those are the main questions. Housing for non-students, is that something that's envisioned? Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. Glad you found your way in. Nate, do you want to respond to some of those questions?
Yeah, sure.
And then
So
I'm going to go to Councilor Ette.
sorry, yeah. So yeah, the overlay, it's mixed use building, so it's, essentially market rate development that could be for any tenant. It's not exclusively students. That was an idea that was discussed at the planning board last year, and they wanted this to be actually, any, housing of any variety that, could serve a market need. The town does have inclusionary zoning, which would apply to these projects. So, likely 12% of the units would be affordable. They would have to be deed restricted and, marketed and monitored, and they'd be permanently affordable. So a percentage of the units would remain affordable. The planning board see this as a great opportunity for housing. And if most of it is students, they also think, and staff thinks it's a great place for this. The hope would be that, some projects provide enough housing that in other parts of town, maybe there is a reduced pressure for the housing market. Granted, there is, a lot of demand for units in Amherst. There are no specific projects envisioned with the overlay. So the one that was discussed is on the corner of Amity Street and University Drive. And that's something that has been probably being under, development for over a year now by the property owners and their team. And so the overlay happened kind of, at the same time on parallel tracks, but it wasn't one or the other. University Drive has been looked at and examined as a potential for different types of development over the years, including housing. And so staff picked up on this. The planning board last year was talking about what areas in town could be rezoned for infill or multi-unit development. And University Drive, along with a few other areas, were identified. University Drive became the priority to move forward. And so right now there isn't a project that, is envisioned, or this is being planned for. The idea is that it opens up the opportunity for something. Perhaps if the overlay was in place, maybe next year or in 2 years, someone would take advantage of it, but there isn't, an imminent project because of it. And then I don't know if there's anything else you'd want me to discuss, Pam.
The question was, is it student only? And I think you addressed that by saying there are also affordable units within this mix.
Right.
Or
And so,
market.
Right. Yeah. It's basically, it's a market rate development. So some developers might want to have various bedroom sizes, 1 to 4 bedrooms. Some might want to have different bedroom sizes and rent to different types of tenants. And so that's just the way it would work. We're not, if we wanted to say it was student housing, we would just say it's student housing, and that's not what we're doing. So it's really just a mixed use building with, market rate and some affordable units.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go to Councilor Ette, please.
I was just wondering, we had a vote where we changed the order of proceedings. I was wondering if we are in the question section or we are in the public comment section, because some of the conversation seems to have blended both of them together.
Yes, and the short answer is, I think when I introduced it for the public, that it would be their comments and their questions. Those get blended in almost every conversation, so it's very difficult to separate out a comment from a question. And I think having somebody be able to ask and or speak what's on their mind at the same time is an efficient use of our time. Councillor Haneke.
Well, I guess I'm trying to figure out, is it time for counselor questions yet or not?
It's getting close because I see no more new hands in the audience. Pat.
So is close, yes or no? I guess that's my question, right?
I'm going to make another announcement saying, if there's anyone else in the audience who would like to speak and make a comment or ask a question, now is the time to do it before we switch over to the counselors having their chance to do it. Pat. You're muted.
I have a comment. I'm a counselor. Can I go ahead yet?
When I finish the public section and I see
Okay.
no more new hands, so I am going to announce that the public comment time has passed and that we are now going to switch over to counselor questions and comments.
Well, I have a comment, but I wonder if
Great.
Christine shouldn't go before me.
Sure.
I note that there is someone in the attendees who wanted to make a comment, Robert Pomeroy.
He
I-
made,
Did he
Robert just
disappear?
spoke.
Oh, he
Rob-
just spoke.
Robert just
I'm
spoke.
sorry, he had his hand up.
Yeah.
I didn't understand that properly. Sorry.
Yep, no problem. He spoke and asked questions and made comments. Pat.
okay. I really want to thank the planning board and the planning department and especially Nate and Christine for clarifying some of the issues that were raised. Initially, because of my volunteer work with the Amherst Mobile Market for 5 years and my ongoing volunteer work with the Survival Center, I was one of the people very concerned about the Big Y property and food access. It was wonderful to receive the letter from Cross Point and to also see that that owner would benefit from the overlay continuing all the way from Northampton Road to Amity Street. Just makes it even more pedestrian friendly. And that I think is really important. I think this is an excellent project and I'm hoping that we can move it forward.
Right, thank you. Councillor Haneke, so I am opening this up to counselor questions and comments.
So I have a lot. I will start with section. I'm not going to go in order. I'm going to start with the ones that I think are most complicated. So I'm going to start with my section 17.4 questions, which is the permitting of mixed-use buildings. It has 3 sort of requirements. And my question with this is, are the requirements waivable? Do the requirements or the definitions of mixed use at all in table 3 apply at all? Or do none of them apply? Is parking the only other allowable use on the first floor? The way 17.410 is written says that 75% has to be any permitted non-residential use other than parking. And then 411 says parking shall be allowed for the remainder. Is residential allowed for the remainder? Is it only, it's very unclear to me how those 2 sections relate to each other, or if that causes other restrictions, like not allowing other residential uses on the first floor at all once the 75% of the street facing facade is met. what are the expected widths of buildings so that I can get an idea of what 75% of that might be? And then if a building, if there's more than one building on a lot, what is the street facing facade of, say, the back building? How would, if we thought about moving to 100% first floor non-residential use, potentially excluding parking, although I would think maybe we'd want to put some parking in there. How would that work for elevator access to upper floors that are residential and mailroom access for residential in terms of how counting that non-residential use at 100% be? So could we actually go to 100% while still putting a mailroom, say, on the first floor like it typically is, or would that suddenly need to be moved to the second floor if we did something like that? And
Can you pause so Nate maybe
that's
could-
most of my 17.4s. So
okay, Nate, you're on. You're muted.
Right. And so the residential could be allowed outside of that 75%. It could be other, permitted non-residential uses as well. And so we were just clarifying that parking could also be allowed in that space. If it was 100% ground floor, as like we were suggesting on the corner, ancillary spaces or common spaces are still allowed. And so an elevator or other things would not be excluded. There's some reasonable expectation of what 100% means. So it's not, something that is going to prevent any building from being built, because then how do you access the upper floors if it has to be really 100% non-residential? So there is some, kind of reasonable expectation there in terms of how that's defined. And then, a building facade length along the street, that varies. And so, someone could have, 100-foot, the property could be wide enough that it's 100 feet of facade length along the street, and maybe it's a smaller property and it's 50 feet. And so really, then it's also the site design for the project. And so the current building, our project at 422 Amity Street has, a larger building near the corner, and then a smaller building that, has a smaller, front facade, and the length is along the property line, but that there's still a small facade length along the street. And so, I think it's really kind of any site, kind of determines it. So, if we zoom in here, if we say, this building has a shorter facade length along the street, this one over here has a wider one. It's really how someone would design the site. If this property I'm drawing on was going to reuse the overlay and they put a building like this big, there's their facade length. But if this property only did a narrow building, there's the facade length. And so it's really dependent on the site design of, each property. Is not, is not a prescribed length of what the facade length is.
Thank you. Mandy, you want to continue? Do you have more questions on?
Well, I guess one of my questions, there were two that weren't answered. Are the requirements in section 17.4 waivable? I didn't see anywhere in this overlay district of any waivability at all. So I'm asking that. And then if there's multiple buildings on a property, of which one is up on the street, if you could think of it, and one is behind it, what's the street facing facade of the back building? And that gets to my question about, do the restrictions or allowances in the use table for mixed use buildings, including when there are multiple buildings on a property, all of the required commercial can be moved to the street facing building, the front building. Is that allowed in this overlay, or are we going to have 24 weird feet 2 and 2 versus combining in? So that was my third question. Do the little words about mixed use buildings in the table 3 use table apply at all to this overlay?
Good question.
No, and 17.510 says more than one building with any permitted use may be located on a single lot. And so if there is a building that has no street frontage, it doesn't need to be a mixed-use building. So, if someone were to design something so the entire street facade is covered by one building, and then they have a second building on the site, it's not required to have a mixed-use component. Those standards aren't waived. So we're not allowing someone to ask for it to become a smaller mixed-use percentage or to waive the mixed use entirely. So the planning board felt pretty strongly about having and requiring a mixed-use component, and say not allowing it to be waived to become an apartment building or something with a really small non-residential footprint.
I'm going to add to that, the 17.31 says there is no provision to waive the dimensional standards of the University Drive Overlay District. And yet, what Mandy just brought up is if you have 17.51, the second building or additional buildings, you say, are any permitted use. So is that not a waiver, or is that
within the base zoning, because it's no longer a mixed-use building. So if someone wants to have an office building and a mixed-use building on a property, that's allowed as long as the underlying zoning allows an office building.
So an apartment building could not be a second building, because in Office Park and in COM, apartments buildings are not allowed. So it would have to be mixed use, but if it's mixed use, what requirements apply? Because 17.410 says street facing facade. It doesn't say street frontage. To me, those are different things, because a building always has street facing in some sense, even if there's a building in front of it, right?
I would disagree. If the building you cannot see from the street, how is that a street facing building?
Jennifer?
Okay, thank you. So I guess this is my wish list. I think I do support greater density of development on University Drive. I think that, if you can't do it here, where can you do it? Considering that the wetlands being still a consideration, I think this is a good spot for greater development. That said, when I've been sitting, or tuning into the planning board meetings since they started this discussion, and certainly, at the beginning, the members were, very much valued and talked about it being a vibrant, thoroughfare, that there would be residential buildings and there would be commercial and there would be retail, and there would even be some green space. They very, very much didn't want it to just be a solid wall of, 5-story apartment buildings. So a place you could maybe grab a sandwich and sit on a bench, and maybe there'd be grass and trees and have lunch, and, maybe employees and faculty at the university would even walk there during their lunchtime. So it was seen as a place that would be, it would have retail, it would, maybe have some entertainment, but it would have some green space, and it would have residential development. So I'd be very concerned about losing that and just having a solid block of, tall apartment buildings. And we're spending a lot of time and effort developing design standards for downtown. And I would like to see that be part of the university, of the overlay district as well. That I know one of the planning board members has a couple of times, she wondered why we would want to protect the Big Y block from having, all residential development, and kind of characterize it as a strip mall. And the first thing I thought is, well, if there were some design standards, maybe it wouldn't have looked so much like a strip mall. So I think if we're you know, as much as we're having design guidelines for downtown, that I would like to see that part of this overlay district. I feel much more comfortable including the Big Y CVS parcel in the overlay district, if it could be for that portion, 100% commercial on the ground floor. I think that's a great, you know, suggestion. And if we are going to go to 6 stories and have it now, it sounds like it has to be 68.5 feet tall to accommodate a 6th floor. I would like to see in exchange for that a higher requirement for affordable housing than the 12%, or maybe it could be, I don't know how what if there's something between affordable housing where the residents would have to be able to qualify for affordable housing and maybe have somewhat less than market rate, so it would be affordable to families or more, you know, there's a whole bunch of residents, most of us, who fall between, if you don't qualify for affordable, but if these rents are being set at 5,000 or 6,000 for a 3 or 4 bedroom, they're not going to be affordable to many people who wouldn't qualify for affordable housing per se. And I would also am concerned about smaller businesses. I always bring up the Hampshire Bike Exchange. There's now there's a new business restaurant there that I think serves like smoothies. There's a Greek restaurant there. I would, and again, in exchange for 6 stories, I think of some of the commercial space could also be available at below market rate. So those smaller, more quote, mom and pop businesses, you know, aren't driven out. As we've seen happen downtown when the cottage shops disappeared, when the cottage shop businesses disappeared, when they took down that building to build One East Pleasant Street, they were never able to afford the rent and come back to downtown. So that would be, again, design standards to not, and maybe that's included in the design standards, to have some green space, so it's just not a block of tall buildings, in exchange for a 6th floor, you know, having some other requirements for commercial and residential below market rate. And if we're going to include the Big Y CVS parcel, that be 100% commercial on the ground floor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure, yeah, the you know, the overlay does require project open space and does have design standards. You know, what the planning board discussed was, you know, it will be during the review process that is all worked out. And so instead of being overly prescriptive, you know, allowing actually some creativity by the developer and having trust that if they are using the overlay, they will follow what's in the bylaw, and it can be discussed through permitting. The downtown design standards, you know, if this overlay were in place before it, you know, we could extrapolate and adapt some of those standards for University Drive. I will say, however, that the context and what the consultants are looking at for downtown is a completely different context than what is in place on University Drive. So there may be elements of what they, you know, determine that we think could be applied to University Drive, but I wouldn't take, you know, wholesale some of those standards and apply them to University Drive. You know, in terms of the mixing the affordability of units or having something above, so the subsidized housing inventory, affordable units, is 80% of the area median income or below. And what's nice about that is the town doesn't calculate that income level, and we don't necessarily have to monitor it, or we can monitor it along with the state. If it's above 80%, it becomes something that the town would implement and have to monitor and enforce. So if we said some other AMI level to kind of get at this missing middle, or however you want to phrase it, you know, not quite market, but more than affordable, that just becomes a local restriction and a local process. And so I've discussed it with the Housing Trust before. HUD does publish 150% AMI. It's not, you know, capital A affordable. It doesn't go on our subsidizing housing inventory. Again, it would be something that we would locally have to manage and monitor. And it hasn't been discussed, you know, it was briefly discussed, I think, with the overlay, but it's something that has, I think, would have broader, you know, implications or discussions, and how does it work both here and then how does the town actually manage that? It would almost have to be a separate, restriction and other things in place. Or we could just say, we could increase the percentage, from 12% to, if you want to say 14%, if you have 6 floors, there could be that. I think, planning board said, well, I think the trade-off is we're getting more housing units is what we need. And then we also would have, tax revenue, we'd have stores. And so it's not as if we're losing anything, we're actually gaining with the overlay, whether or not we have more affordable units than what is already going to be required as part of our inclusionary zoning. And so, the discussion was had at the planning board, and members felt as if we weren't losing anything. It's actually, we're still gaining affordable units, more units, and commercial space. So it's not as if we're, losing out by having that 6th floor.
You want to?
I just wanted to say, but visually, it's very different. I mean, that is a drawback to, that can be a drawback if it's visually not as appealing, but maybe we say, well, it's worth it if we get some more affordable units and we have some support for the smaller mom and pop businesses that we don't want to see disappear. And I guess just to say, in terms of design standards, I was thinking more of design standards for that overlay district, not necessarily just using what is being developed for downtown. But you're saying that will be part of the permitting process?
Well, no, I'm saying that the overlay has standards and conditions with, required project open space now and design guidelines as part of the overlay. And so, talking about breaking up facades, overhanging awnings or projections between first and upper floors, change in plane or other treatments to break down the scale and mass of a large flat facade, placement of parking a certain distance or behind buildings. And so there is, some design guidelines already as part of the overlay. What I was saying is if the downtown design standards has additional things we like, related to architecture or building, setbacks, then we could take those pieces from the downtown and then, incorporate them if the overlay were already in place. The 6th floor is required to be stepped back. There's no distance, but again, that would happen during permitting. What is the right step back to minimize building massing and height? And so that's how the bylaw is worded. I will say what Chris mentioned, the project at 422 Amity Street, the way the buildings were designed, they thought they could have a 6th floor step back over just small parts of the building. And it sounds as if they may not proceed with that because it's not cost effective at this point. It may be in the future, but given kind of the development climate right now, it really then depends on if you go in, planning a 6th floor. So the project wasn't originally going to have a 6th floor. They designed it, started permitting, and then when the overlay came, they said, oh, maybe we could change it, but they really already had a site design. And so I think if someone comes in knowing they could do a 6th floor, they would probably plan for it in a way that it would work, but it's hard to just add on a 6th floor to something that's already kind of been designed.
Thank you. I'm going to step in ahead. My hand went down for some reason. In section 17.35, these are setback requirements. And I was interested to know why there's only a foot or two difference, but what are the differences in setbacks from Northampton Road, Amity Street? And so on the front yard setback on University Drive, which is, facing University Drive, it's a minimum of 24 feet from the property line. On Northampton Road, which is a busier road, granted, the minimum setback is 25 feet. And it occurred to me, why not match either the University Drive setback of 24 feet or match what was built on the south side of Northampton Road, which is the one University Drive South, or 1 South University Drive, the eye doctor building. That sits fairly close to the street. Why would we not be considering matching those setbacks so there's some consistency, at least in the two buildings, perhaps facing each other? Also setbacks, so in the RG, the rear and side setbacks to adjacent properties is 10 feet. on the north end of this proposed overlay is a BL district, which is where the hangar is and Cayman's real estate. And immediately to the east of that is Charles Place. Charles Place is a low 1- and 2-story homes. It is a well-established residential district, and I'm thinking that we need to make some consideration for either additional setbacks or a height cap of a building immediately adjacent to existing residential homes. So that's something that I want to pursue a little more. In terms of building setbacks, the 6th floor is pretty darn tall to be stepping back. Why not step back after the 3rd floor? So on the Barry Roberts project, one of the main buildings along the street, along University Drive, is a 3-story building with a 4th, looks more like a penthouse, and it steps way back to the penthouse. So it is very pedestrian friendly. It is not an overwhelming scale. So I'm thinking that we could perhaps consider step backs of the building itself, building facade after the 3 floors. And then back to the adjacent residential, that we cap the height at 35 feet, which is the RG height or BL height, and keep it at 3 floors. So it could still be a mixed use building, but it would have a different configuration. And then to one of the points that Jennifer actually made, which is the talking about the street facade or just some of the non-residential uses, that I'd like to have us thinking about how to replace retail space lost per parcel. So if something is built on the bike shop property, 65 University Drive, how do you incorporate capability for those commercial that are lost? And I'll turn it over to somebody else for the next topic. Councilor Haneke.
Thanks. I have the same question about the 25-foot setback on Route 9. I think Route 9 right now is a 10-foot setback. So it seems strange to go up to 25 there, at least for the BL section. I think it's a 10-foot, but it's not, yeah, it's larger than the BL setback is now. And so that didn't, I'm with Pam on that. Like, why is it so big? So I'm still trying to get how some of these sections relate to each other. Section 17.3 something says that dimensional standards aren't waivable, and it's specifically in section 17.3. 3.1 says there's no provision to waive the dimensional standards of the U Drive overlay district. That's section 17.3. So how does that result in not being able to waive section 17.4 or 5 standards? It seems like that was just done in there, but section 17.4 is not a dimensional standard at all. So I'm still trying to figure out whether things are waivable or not outside of section 17.3. If there were 2 buildings on a property, how and what would the requirements be for the back building that can't be seen from the street to be a mixed-use building? What would those requirements be? Would they be the section 17.4 requirements because that's street-facing facade only? Would it be some other requirement? Would it have no requirements other than mixed-use commercial on some of it to create a mixed-use building? So I guess I'm trying to figure out what those requirements are. Or are they not allowed at, well, they would be allowed. Mixed-use buildings shall be permitted by site plan review with the following requirements. If there's a street-facing facade, it must be 75%. And then, but if there's not, is there a requirement? I guess I'm still trying to figure that out. Section 17.521, when I read it, that's the encouraging a 10-foot wide multi-use path. It doesn't read to me as if it requires that multi-use path, but it encourages one. If we're aiming for a multi-use path all the way up the west side of University Drive, why wouldn't we require a 10-foot wide path with where it needs to be so that it always lines up with other developments, thinking about things being built at different times? I guess I don't quite get how this encourages that 10-foot wide multi-use path when there's only a encourage the reuse of the access drive into that, but not a requirement, and nothing about how far away from the property line it needs to be or whether it needs to match up with anything. How does section 17.541, which says that a majority of the front facade, which is different language than street facing facade or front building facade, which is two other things that's been used in this bylaw, shall be located along the minimum front setback? How does that relate to 17.510, which says more than one building may be permitted on any site? Because how do you get a second building behind a first with that second building having a majority of the front facade along the front setback? Since of that language, or is 17.541 meant to say a majority of the front building facade should be located on the front setback? And how does that majority of the front facade on the setback also relate to the 75% of street facing facade? If a building is L-shaped, say, at 60% on the front line and 40% not on the front property line, setback line, what is the street facing facade? Is it the total front of that building for the 75% requirement, or is it only the front setback part to determine how much is the 75%?
Nate?
Sure. There is a few questions there. Yeah, I mean, so we can't require that the access drive be something, it's private property. But the width of the setback on that side of University Drive has the building set back enough that you can have at least a 10-foot wide multi-use path. And so, you know, that's, and the road isn't centered in the right of way, right? So often in town, the road is askew within the right of way. And so a setback varies a little bit. And so, you know, between the setback, having most of the facade along the setback line, you know, will create something where there is the possibility of reusing the western access drive into a multi-use path. You know, we can't require it, but we can encourage it, and the setback means the building can't, you know, go right up past it to, you know, cut off some kind of access point there. And generally, like I said, some of this is what's reasonable, and so we're not going to say that, well, because most of the building has to be along the front setback line, you can't have some step backs in the facade or something happens to a building. And so I guess, Mandy, Joe, in your proposal, it's hard to determine, well, how far back is this L and what's really happening? And so if, you know, if there's some portion of the building that is along the front facade, you know, that setback line, that's the front piece. I mean, like, some of it would be, there are so many variations, but I guess without visually knowing how you're describing it, you know, that becomes something that has to be, you know, worked on with the building commissioner and staff, and then the permit granting authority as this were moving forward. And so, you know, 422 Amity Street has two buildings. You know, one wraps the corner. There's variations in how it's worked out, and then there's one building with a small, narrow piece facing what would be University Drive, and so that is the University Drive piece. So if if I shared my screen, this is what's shown on the website here. And so, you know, if this building had an L back here, no, that's not part of the mixed use requirement. It's what's right here in the front, you know, or what's right here along the front. And so, you know, that, you know, if it's, you know, 5 feet back, well, that's a little different. If it's 50 feet back, that's different. And so I think it's really, you know, some of it is you can't write in every possible variation into a bylaw. And so some of it is then it's being discussed at the permit level, at the level with staff. And so, you know, if someone came in and said, oh, I'm going to be 7 feet back here and then have this big long piece right here. Well, the 7 feet to me, that's a step back and it's still part of the front facade, right? At some point it isn't. And it's kind of really site specific, building design specific. Pam, you'd asked about requiring a step back at 3 floors
Right.
and doing something. And to me, that just ruins the overlay. We allow 5 stories downtown. I don't know why we would require and minimize the potential for residential units in the overlay by requiring step backs at 3 floors. I think, you know, this was designed without the overlay, and the developer here and the architects have done a great job of breaking up the building facade and stepping them back, but it's not a requirement to me. And so it really then becomes, you know, how is it framed? So I don't want to say that a 3rd floor has to be stepped back 10 feet or 5 feet. We don't have any measurement in the overlay because, you know, it can be costly and then you can lose units. And so really it becomes, again, you know, if this were going to be 5 floors and the permit granting authority said, wow, that is just one big massive facade, even though it's the narrower piece of the building, we want to see some punch outs. We want to see some banding, something. They have that ability with the overlay to require some movement in the facade, whether that's 2 feet, 3 feet, whatever.
So this is a good example, and thank you for pulling this image up.
Right.
At three floors, this building changes, it steps back. It has horizontal banding along above the 1st floor. So these are all elements that add to essentially to the pedestrian experience, because you're breaking up the mass of a really big block into some manageable pieces. So it's, you know, I'm not going to die on my sword if, you know, if there's no step back after the 3rd floor, but I think these are the kinds of things that we need to talk about a little bit more. And that brings up one of my points that I think would be very helpful to all of us. And I have started to lay this out on my drafting table, creating a quick cross section of the Barry Roberts building right there at University. So I'm going to share that at another meeting to show the scale of the setback from the property line and the distance from the curb itself. That brings up so I think it would be very helpful, Nate, if you or the planning staff could at least block out with just outlines where buildings could sit on these parcels going up and down University Drive. What does it look like to have something at 24 feet from the property line? And just a box. But that's the kind of the build out look that I think would be very, very helpful to everybody. Secondarily, with the 24, it's about 41 feet from the curb to the face of the building. And so right now in the Barry Roberts plan, there is some real redundancy in sidewalks. The existing sidewalk along University Drive is maintained in that project, and it appears to be actually of no purpose. And all it does is it subdivides the green planting strip between the curb and the sidewalks being created near the building. Those sidewalks near the building are the result of using that old access road. So it's, I applaud the design that they're proposing because it does create a 10-foot wide walkable area near the building, but it could also go a step farther and remove the sidewalk along the street. That's a very unfriendly environment to be sitting on University Drive with lots of traffic and being very, very close to the curb. So if planning staff could do the blocks and could show basically that 10-foot you're calling it a multi-use path, and just overlay that on existing conditions, I think that would be very helpful for people to understand the relationships in space. Let's see, anybody else? Jennifer?
Yes, I just wanted to, reaffirm your suggestion, Pam, that, what would it be, on the southeast corner of Amity and University Drive that borders the residential neighborhood, and it's also very close to Amity Place. And I think to look at that as a transitional, like, limited business parcel that would not go to the 5 or 6 stories, so that you don't have these tall buildings looming over, what's an already developed residential neighborhoods. Because I think that would very much change how it would feel like on Charles Circle, to have a 6-story building in your backyard. And I think that it will I don't know how, so I guess this is directed to Nate, how you would decide how large the parcel would be that we kind of consider like a transitional between the 5 stories or 6 stories and what we would almost treat as a limited business district. So there's some transition between the density and height and the adjacent residential neighborhood. I don't know if you, like, we're talking about the big Y parcel,
Yeah.
Having different requirements. I don't know how large that parcel should be, where it might only be 3 stories high.
Yeah, I mean, or Pam, we have it in our bylaw in other places, and Pam suggested it, you could have a provision where, where this abuts an existing residential neighborhood, the, setback, rear side setback needs to be, 25 feet and a maximum height of 3 floors. I mean, so instead of having a geographic,
Yeah.
Another kind of sub area of the overlay, you have that standard, and then it applies where it applies. And so there's, I think to me that's probably a better way to approach it than opposed to, trying to say, well, in this area you have a different, kind of height dimension or something. And so there's probably a way, there's probably a few different ways you could do it, but something along what I just said or what Pam said could work.
And is that language the planning department could provide?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mandy, and then I just also want to note that you're leaving soon.
Yeah, this will be my last. I would
Okay,
love if this hearing
and-
gets continued after I make this comment.
Yeah, and so I think our conversation on this will go, if we're still asking questions, would go no later than 7:45, so we can get to the few remaining items on the agenda. So, Councilor Haneke.
Yeah, I have a lot more questions. Unfortunately, I do have to leave, but I've got concerns with the setback on the east side of University Drive. I believe in initial discussions, it was being discussed that one might not be 24 feet because yet this proposal says 24 feet. But when you look at where the public way ends, that's a huge setback already from the actual street. And so then you're adding 24 feet on top of that, which almost makes from the street maybe close to 50 feet of setback. And I'm not exactly sure why that's necessary. And then in what's been being discussed about RNs and all, I would not agree with that, because that's all of the east side of University Drive borders an RN. And if we make that only 3 stories, we've almost eliminated the whole benefit of this overlay district. If we say anything that borders a residential zone can't be more than 3 stories, that's the entire east side of University Drive that is now no longer able to be anything above 3 stories because it all borders residential zone. I would maybe consider it an extra setback, but I couldn't support limiting that general requirement of if it borders a residential zone, that it can't be more than 3 stories. That eliminates the purpose of this overlay district. I'm sorry, I do have to leave. I have a lot more questions, so I'm hoping that you guys will choose to continue the hearing to a different date. I think we have a lot more discussion to do about how this all interacts, but thank you so much.
Thank you.
For everything, and I apologize for having to leave.
Sure. Yeah,
Thank you.
quickly, I'll just say, I didn't suggest a residential zone. I was saying existing single family home. So there's a way, to again, kind of be a little more specific. So it's only, if there's a existing dwelling, not the whole right RN or, neighboring residential zone. But
Thank you. Yep, it's a good clarification, and that would be something we would want to clarify. We would want to codify. I haven't heard from Councillor Ette. Do you want to add or ask any questions? I've just been jumping to hands, so.
No, not at this moment. Thank you.
Okay. Jennifer.
Yeah, I was, I don't want to be redundant, but so Charles Street, I mean, there's certain streets, I don't know if we do within, that's why I was thinking within a certain number of feet, or because some of the streets are much closer than others. Like Blue Hills is further from University Drive than, well, Charles Street, which is literally right there. The street that, Pam was talking about. So that's why, I didn't know if we can define adjacent perhaps differently in different parts of the district, or the overlay district.
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, I would have it really only apply to the Charles Lane properties. There's really no other, housing units that, single family homes that are that close to the proposed boundary.
And it would
Yeah.
be helpful to Amity Place as well. They would benefit from that.
They're across the street in a distance. I'm not sure.
But
they're not.
they would still probably appreciate it if they would benefit from the Charles Drive consideration.
Yep. And I can vouch that from my house, I can see Kendrick Place. It is 5 stories, and the sun goes down a half an hour before it goes down anywhere else because it blocks my sun. So it is definitely a visual impact, and I think the comment that Jennifer just made is valid. And let's figure out how to craft a bit more protection for that. I was going to make a note of the east side of University Drive. It is, it has the wonderful Swift bike lane, multimodal, whatever path. And that is clearly something that we do not want to damage or interrupt. I think I could safely say that everything that has been developed is about what those sites can support, just given the proximity of wetlands and the man-made wetlands that were created as what rain gardens in front of the Hangar and Cayman's building 30 years ago. There are a lot of restrictions on that east side of the street. I don't know if it makes sense to address east and west differently. I'm not excited about, subdividing all these conditions, but in reality, it's just a very different situation. As you were saying, it could be 50 feet back from the curb to the face of a building, whereas on the west side, it could be 40 feet. So it's definitely different characteristics. Jennifer.
I mean, I've always thought since it was built that 70 University Drive on the east side is a wonderful development. It is 3 stories. Even the coloring, it just totally blends in with the foliage and the greenery behind it. It's not a, it fits in the setting very well. It's not overpowering, and it's a building that is a mix of students and non-students. I mean, it's to the extent we could replicate that, I think visually and just, who the building serves. I don't know quite how we do that, but that was in my old district and it seemed like exactly the kind of development we want. Again, it provided housing for students and non-students. It blended in well. It looked like it belonged in the setting on that side of the street.
Mhm. Chris or Nate, any other comments?
No, I mean, there's some considerations here. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It could be just, we could just have a uniform setback 25 feet everywhere. Sometimes we try to have zoning respond to, the site and context and everything. And so that's why it's different. I get it. Some people would say, why 24 feet on one side and why 20 feet here? But some of it would be trying to respond to what's on the ground and kind of what are some setbacks and existing conditions. That could be modified. Jennifer, to your comment, I think 70 University Drive is set back quite a bit from the road. And honestly, I used to think that there could be more units there, right? There's not that many units in that building. But the way the zoning was at the time, they were kind of limited. And so, I think that would still could look really nice and still have, 15 more units or something. They are pretty small. So that was the first one that had some studio apartments that were quite small, and the state had to ask because some are affordable if we were seeing units that are, 350, 400 square feet. And we said we are at the time, right? Trends changed. A few years before, it was a lot of 3 and 4 bedroom units, and then it was now, studios and ones or a mix. Yeah, I mean, the planning board talked about this. A lot of planning board members think this will be great, right? Like, you'll have these multi-use paths, you'll have nice buildings, you'll have active streetscapes with plazas and shops and what have you. And so, Bruce had said some of it is you have to trust that a developer will come and have a nice project. And so the zoning, like I said, offers the opportunity. It doesn't, require that certain things happen in terms of what uses are there or if existing buildings or shops can be maintained. We've talked about it before. It's not really a zoning issue, but could there be other mechanisms in place to try to encourage some of the businesses to return? But I think that's everyone's hope is that, the street belt, the green belt will be wide enough to support the existing trees so they don't have to be, removed. We'll have these, the bikeways on both sides and buildings set back far enough that even at 6 floors, there's not a canyon-like effect. And so people were really excited by this opportunity. I agree with Pam that the sidewalk on the west side of University Drive would slowly be phased out if this overlay were implemented and the west side was developed. It's really it's not accessible. It's crumbling and it's right on the street. And so the town has a MassWorks grant, to put a roundabout at that intersection of Amity and University Drive, and then plans to repave the section of University Drive South. And so it's a discussion the town will have in the next, 6 months to a year to figure out what's the best strategy here, because agreed, it's not really a pleasant place to be right on the curb in the street. It's a narrow, there's a narrow shoulder now. And so, during planning board discussions, we showed images of other developments from different communities and cities and, kind of probably what's happening with the downtown design standards. You see things and you really like, and the hope is that that's what we're going to get to. And I think the Barry Roberts project is a really nice example. I think they were really thoughtful with the site design and everything. And so we can't say every project will reflect that, but we're hoping that the overlay with some of the standards and conditions we have encourages that, and the permitting board will have the ability to really help guide development to, have a certain style and really reinforce, kind of the walkability and vitality of University Drive.
Thank you. Chris, you have your hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to remind everybody that the 10-foot wide multi-use path that's being proposed is on private property. And so the private landowner is, has the ability to allow people to go there or not to go there. And if we lose the public sidewalk along the edge of University Drive, it could be kind of problematic. So I think that's a topic that needs to be explored further. And the other thing I wanted to ask is, Councillor Haneke asked a lot of questions, and I wondered if she could send them through Pam Rooney, the ones that she asked tonight, if you could forward those to us, because I tried to make note of them, but there were so many that I couldn't make note of all of them.
Yes,
That
I
would be
will ask her to put them in writing. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. So my hand disappeared again. We have not talked about parking. And I think, Nate, when you just mentioned the 70 University Drive, that it's small, it could be in part because the parking requirement was such that that takes up more of the land area. And it's also bounded on three sides by wetland. So can we talk about parking a little bit? I understand that a developer could build internal parking. A number of buildings around town have done that, not in great quantity. The way I think the bylaw is structured, it would not be a requirement to provide any parking, but be left completely to the developer as to what would make a viable project. So it would be completely market driven. Excuse me. It feels that there almost needs to be, I know we're supposed to be moving away from providing parking and forcing people to use public transit. So that brings up two things. One is who might end up paying for and creating bus stops along University Drive. Right now, there are not any at the upper end, I don't think, on the west side, except all the way down by the medical building and CVS building. Are we supposed to be proposing bus stops, pullovers, to help facilitate people who might actually not have a car? So can you talk a little bit about the demand for parking that you are hearing from developers? And I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Sure, yeah, I think it varies throughout town and where you are. You know, we've heard that 70 University Drive, the parking is rarely half full, and they see it as a lot of pavement for very little use. You know, in some developers, I know, you know, some developers like to have at least one space per unit, whether or not it's required, because that's what they think they need to rent the units. And so the planning board did discuss this, although, you know, there's no parking requirement for the overlay. I mean, sometimes I think parking is used as a backdoor way to say no to a project, right? 2 spaces per unit. There's really no justification for that other than it's been in a lot of zoning bylaws for decades. And so given that there's not any on-street parking nearby, and someone would have to park really far and walk if they got a permit, you know, the planning board said, well, let's not have any parking requirements. Let's leave it to the developer, because with a mixed use requirement, to make something successful, they're going to have to come in and provide some parking. So the overlay does require a parking utilization study and a parking management plan, so that the permit granting authority can determine that there's enough adequate parking, you know, on the site. And so, although there is no formula for what that number is, you know, a developer would say, well, if this is the size of my retail space, you know, here's what I think the number of parking spaces needs to be. Here's how many units I'm proposing. Here's what I think. And so elsewhere in the bylaw now, we still allow flexibility in terms of units, as long as the permit granting authority is comfortable, given, say, lease agreements that say restrict parking, or proximity to bus stops, or shared parking. And so all of that can be used by the permit granting authority here in the overlay to determine what is the right number of parking spaces. So, if a project came in and they said we're providing no parking, and they didn't really have a good utilization study, the planning board could require, more, a better study or something to really determine what is an adequate number of off-street parking spaces. So, I think some of the planning board members said, let's allow the developers, let's put some trust in a developer that they'll actually create something that they want to be successful here, right? Because like I said, there isn't a street nearby where someone could park. They can't get an on-street parking for Blue Hills or Dana. They're not a resident there. They can't get, an on-street parking for Amity Street unless they're way up by the town center and somehow they walk half a mile. And so they really can't get any parking off-street except for what's provided on site. And so because of that, the planning board was comfortable with this kind of parking requirement. If this were an overlay in East Amherst, I think we'd have a different kind of parking requirement because of what might be the neighborhood there, or what, the streets are there. And so because of this location and, kind of the parking around, we didn't say you need 1 space per unit or 2 spaces or so many spaces per square feet of retail like we do elsewhere in the bylaw. And so, although we don't, like I said, have a formula, there is a requirement to prove that you do, you need it or don't need it. And so
I'm going to ask if Doug Marshall can be brought in. He's raised his hand. Does somebody have the ability to do that?
Yeah, I'm doing that.
Oh, I didn't see Athena's name anymore. Thank you, Athena.
I was wondering who was town hall.
Oh, Doug.
Doug, you're muted still.
Hello, Doug.
Hello. Seems to take a while to transition from panelists to audience and vice versa. I was just going to add that one of the other considerations we had when we were talking about parking was the location of this and the topography in relationship to UMass. That it's essentially a level, there's no hill between this site, this area, and UMass. And there's good bus service up and down University Drive. There's a good bikeway directly down to the university. There's a supermarket right there. There's a post office right there. If there's anywhere in town that you could probably live car-free, this is probably it. And so whether it's students or whether it's, junior staff who want to live in an apartment, it seemed like this could be an area where we just leave it to the market on parking. That's really all I wanted to add.
Right. Actually, while Doug is here, I would like to ask if there has been any discussion. I'm not asking you to divulge UMass secrets, but has there been any conversation between the planning board and UMass in terms of any kind of reciprocity between UMass and the town in terms of here's this major effort to try to rezone something to accommodate students, in essence, and what is UMass bringing to the table on their part?
I make a very strong effort to separate my planning board activities from my work life.
Yeah.
So I don't speak for the university, so I would not comment on that.
Then I'm going to phrase it another way. Have there even been conversations to the effect of, is there any kind of reciprocity? That was one of the very first things the planning board talked about when it came to discussion.
Yeah, I would say let's get the overlay passed and then we can have that conversation. Right, I mean, but the idea was to have some incentives if we had discussions with UMass, whether it's the overlay or other things the town's doing, you know, to have a productive conversation with UMass. So the planning board held extra meetings, I guess it was just last year, you know, to talk about housing, and UMass officials came to a meeting, the town manager and assistant town manager as well. And I think, you know, I guess in my opinion is the Housing Trust has also talked to UMass officials, and we've always talked about what, you know, what can UMass do? I do think it's a, you know, what can the town also do? And so I think some of the conversation is how do we reframe, you know, how we talk about student housing or housing in general. And yeah, I think if, you know, if things were to move forward, the idea is to still have conversations with UMass and see what they're planning. It really hasn't happened, you know, the planning board's been
Okay,
busy
that's,
enough.
that's the answer. That's the answer. No, it hasn't really happened. Thank you. Jennifer, and then Christine.
Let me let Christine go first.
Okay.
Oh, I just had two comments. One is that we're hoping, and I don't think this is wrong to hope, that when Amherst allows more development to happen along University Drive, and the university sees that that is working well, that the university might therefore consider more housing along their portion of University Drive. I'm not sure exactly what portions of that are developable or not, but during that town gown project that we had a number of years ago, we did talk to the university about developing some of their property along University Drive. For various reasons, they decided to develop the Massachusetts Avenue property with, I forget the name of it again, but the big building that was just built. So they've decided to do that, but there may be some degree of encouragement to UMass to start developing some other portions of their property on University Drive if they see the town is doing that. I also wanted to make note of the fact that the university did participate with the town in the design of the roundabout that we just got money for from MassWorks. So we got, I think, and Nate can correct me, I think we got $1.9 million to build the roundabout at the intersection of Amity Street and University Drive. And most of the design work for that roundabout was done by the university. So we really benefited from that. So that was kind of a joint effort, but the university did most of that work. So we do, you know, do work back and forth and encourage each other to do things that are beneficial to both. So I just wanted to make that.
Thank you.
Note of that.
Yeah, good to be reminded. Jennifer, and then I think we need to wrap.
I'm muted, yeah. I know I sound like a broken record because I've said this a lot, but because I live 2.5 blocks from campus and all this, really every student house has as many cars parked as tenants living there. And when I've spoken to students, I'm like, why do you have did you feel the need to have a car because you're so close to campus? And they say that's how they get to school from their hometowns, whether it's in-state or one of the surrounding states. So my concern is, although this is so close to the university that students will, to the extent students live there, and probably others will have cars, I think a lot of them will try and park in the Big Y parking lot, but I guess that's something Big Y is going to have to address. Also, Charles Lane and Blue Hills is not permit parking. So I don't know if that's something that we want to go hand in hand with the development, because those are certainly streets that are accessible to park on. I share Christine's concern in terms of the sidewalk on the west side of the street, that there needs to be a sizable sidewalk there, because again, in terms of if there's many students living on the street now, they're out at night when it's dark, and if there's not good sidewalks, they'll be walking in the street. So that's, we're going to have to accommodate that, whether it's the developer or the town. That's it.
Yeah. I want to make one more comment, and then we need to have some closure for this session. Wetlands. We all know that everything coming down the hill ends up at University Drive. It is a very wet area. Do we have a recent wetland survey? do we have any adjustments that can be made to our known wetland boundaries based on the FEMA work that you all did a couple of years ago, 1 year? What are the parameters for wetland? I think one of the things that we've heard from a number of people so far is that they're concerned about loading the properties that are along this route to further, I don't know, exacerbate the high water in this area. Is there anything that we should be doing in this bylaw to encourage acknowledgement of heavy rain events and raising buildings up so that it's either parking on the ground floor or the building sits a little higher? Have you all in the planning department had any of these conversations? And I'm just going to put that out there. I don't want the answer tonight because we need to move on, but that's something that I would love to get some feedback on.
Sure, can I just have a quick, can I have a quick response?
Sure.
So the town has really strict wetland regulations and bylaw, and we also have, you know, strict stormwater regulations and bylaw. And so the planning board did discuss this, and the idea is not to duplicate stormwater or wetland regs in the overlay. And so, you know, pre and post development has to be met. And so the current development at 422 Amity Street, you know, is still working its way through the Conservation Commission because they, you know, really take that seriously. And so we're not going to try to put some wetland regulations in the overlay. We already have existing things in place for that. So that's really not, you know, the place to put it in the zoning.
Thank you. Okay. I'm not sensing that we are ready to vote up or down on this bylaw tonight. So I'm actually going to make a motion. I move to continue the public hearing to our next meeting, which is December 17 at 6:35 p.m. This will be the normal CRC meeting time. Is there a second?
Second.
Wonderful. Is there, let's go around the three of us, four of us, thank you. Pat DeAngelis. A vote to continue.
Aye.
Thank you. Jennifer.
Yes.
Councillor Ette.
Aye.
And Pam Rooney is also an aye. So we are continuing this discussion to the next meeting, December 17. I hope it's been somewhat informative to the planning board. I don't have a clue if it will be helpful. Anyway, many of us will probably listen in since it's also discussing, the planning board's also discussing the track next to my house. So I'll be there. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Doug, for joining us, and Nate and Christine for providing that background and information. I will ask everyone to send additional questions to me, and I will forward it to both Christine and Nate. And you can distribute as you wish once you get them. I'm trying to remember, I don't have my parliamentarian here to remind me if I can then share all the questions with the committee members. I think I can.
You're going to, I'm sorry, I was like,
Oh, we've got our parliamentarian here.
you're going to collect questions and send them on to Chris and Nate and then share them out for the
Yeah.
next meeting? Yeah, that's
Yeah.
fine.
Okay, great.
It's best to have them posted online before we post in SharePoint so that members of the public have access at the same time committee members do. So just please send them on to me and I'll post them before you share them around with members.
Great. Okay, I'll do that. Thanks, everybody. Feel better. Everybody feel better. And so we have a few minor, we still have a quorum, Pat. If you're uncomfortable, feel free to leave. We're just we have no action items other than our deliberation. We have no discussion items, no minutes to approve. And our next agenda preview is clearly University Drive overlay zoning. If for some unforeseen reason we are at a point where we're closing all that up, I put solar bylaw on the agenda for the 17th just to protect our details in case we want to talk about it. No announcements and nothing anticipated within 48 hours of this meeting. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Thanks.
Good night.
Thanks, Athena.